Success takes a lot of failure, right? But a lot of people don't talk about the fact that to fail, you got to make some decisions. We all know that it takes a lot of failure to succeed, a lot of failure to be highly effective. But we fail to recognize one of the paths to success and to the failure piece, and it's making decisions. We as a people are amazing. Nobody has to even train us. Amazing at overthinking. We stay stagnant. We talk about it a lot. Sometimes we're big dreamers. We stay stuck on our dreams for a long time, but we don't execute on the dream. We stay on the planning phase for a long time, if we even plan. Sometimes we just stay stuck in the dreaming phase. But you have to have a dream. You have to have a goal. You have to have a place that you want to arrive. And as you arrive at these places, you realize that it's not the arriving, it's the process. It's the failing. It's the decisiveness, the decisions. However, you gotta have a target. And then you gotta have to make a plan. You make the plan and then you're done with that. And that's the piece that we don't close the door to that piece, often. And then you execute. In order to execute, you got to be very decisive. You got to make the decision right then and there. You don't think about it. That's the planning phase, is the thinking about it. The planning phase is where you reach out to people and you get advice. It's where you Google some statistics. You Google how other people have done it. The planning phase is going into your memory banks and extracting everything you have ever read, because success leaves clues, right? So you learn from other people's successes and other people's failures. And that's where the planning phase really should take place. And then you just close the door to that. You're past that phase, and then you get to the execution. And that's where you put the horse blinders in. That's where focus, ultra focus, comes into play. If there's one thing, one word that will take you to success, it's focus. It's focus, focus, focus. So that's where it happens. It's in the execution piece. And the execution piece, you spill out with decisions, one after the other. Somebody asks, where do we go from here? What do we do now? You tell yourself, you wake up in the morning, what do you do? Right? Because if you're like me, you have a dream, and then you have goals, and you got wishes at the end of it all, but your wishes is the target. The dream is it's before the target. It's like the bullseye is your wishes. The circle around the bullseye is the target, more realistic. And then you have your goals, which is hitting the board, just getting towards that area. And that's really doable. And then you go to execution. And then your plan has 30, 60, 90 a year. So to get to a year, let me separate that in quarters. Let me put that in 90-day increments. Let me take my 90-day increments and 30-day increments. Let me take my 30-day increments in four week increments. And then you take your weekly, and that's your daily routine. If you're going to take a day off a week, or if you're lucky, you're going to take 2 days off a week, then you got to take your week and split it in 5. So in the morning, you wake up and you have the decisions already that you're making for the week, for that day. You already know what you're shooting for the week. And at the end of the week, you're going to look back and not at work, at home, in your coffee table, in the bathroom, in your bed, and you're going to reflect upon that week. And you're going to be like, okay, I achieved this. I didn't achieve this. And that's the small planning phases that are going to determine the next week. And then as soon as you wake up, the decisions start to pour through. So my plan is not to break down and focus on the whole success piece, planning piece, 30, 60, 90 piece, goals, dreams, and wishes piece, execution piece. It's the decision. That's what we don't speak about enough, is if you want to be highly effective, if you want to be successful, if you want to create movement in the right direction, it takes decisions over and over and over and over. And that's what we don't do enough of. We get stuck in this rut of, day in, day out, day in, day out. There is some beauty in being consistent and going in and doing the same thing every day, working yourself to the bone every day. And eventually you get lucky. Eventually that routine will create success. Well, let the routine be decisions and execution. Don't let it be the monotonous nothingness of going in and letting the day drive you. I am a big believer in surrendering to life, because I believe that there is a God that has a higher plan than you. But I plan, I dream, I wish, I execute, I decide, like if I'm the only one that I have to count on. So I go in every single day intentional. I have a plan for today, and I'm gonna shoot for that day. I have a calendar full of things. I have a to-do list, and I got a GSD list, get shit done list. And I don't always complete them. Sometimes they go to the next day, they get moved forward, or sometimes I realize that they're just not important enough decisions to keep there. But I have to make decisions. I have to be decisive, intentional, and they got to be worthy. If you don't have a plan that you have created, then those decisions are probably not going to be worthwhile, because those decisions are made on the fly, where you're just letting your day go through. So you go in and, for me in a restaurant, you go in and you do your walkthrough, you count your money, and you let the day unfold. You become a firefighter and you just put out fires all day long, and you deal with nothing but problems, and you go home depressed because all you dealt with was negativity. If it's in the restaurant and you're trying to be intentional, you go in and you say, today we're gonna be, focus on on our customers, and the answer is yes. Now what's the question? And we're going to try to read people. We're going to play poker today and tonight. We're going to try to read people and try to get to see how we get to great. We don't want to get to okay. So we're focused on making sure that our team knows that we're touching every table and we're asking them if everything is absolutely fantastic. We don't want to say if everything is okay. And then we want to read their face. We want to read their body language. We want to see if they're eating, if they're not eating at all, if they're not drinking at all, and then why. Be maniacal as to why and try to figure it out. And is it because they're full? Is it because they're unsatisfied? Is it because they didn't really like it? And let's attack that. And then, maybe it's the quality of the food. Maybe it's, it's supposed to have the lime on the tacos across the top and not on the side of the plate. Let's be maniacal about those details. Let's be intentional about that. Let's make sure that we're being intentional and that we're making a difference. But let's be decisive. If somebody says, what do we do in this situation? Okay, make a decision. And that's how you're going to move forward. Yes, you're going to fail many a times because you're brave enough to make those decisions. But if you don't make those decisions, you're never going to get to succeed. If you don't fail a ton, you got to only be right one or two times to be very successful. But you got to be wrong so many times to be right a couple times. And you got to make decisions to be wrong a ton of times. And in order to be right a couple times, in order to be highly effective, in order to be successful. So be decisive, make decisions. That should be the core of everything. Now it's all a puzzle. It's not a two-step, take 2 steps to success. Take 5 steps to success. But it takes being decisive, being intentional, having a system. And sometimes that system is not going to work, but you got to have a system to know if it's not going to work. So, plan it out. Have your target, have your wishes, have your dreams, because if you only have your goals and you achieve it and you get there, you're going to be left wanting more. So I already plan to hit my goals. So I have to have my dreams ahead of that so I could go in with already the knowing that if I hit all my goals, I'm going to achieve my dreams. And if I achieve my dreams, I'm going to achieve my wishes. So that leaves me not having to plan all the time, not having to overthink all the time. I want to get stuck in the execution phase, in the decisive phase, and let the goals, dreams, and wishes unfold. Because at some point you realize that it's that process that you really love. It's the process of growth, of achieving. It's the process of doing that is what's worthy of it all. Be decisive, my friend. Love ya.